Have you ever heard whispers coming from your chimney in the middle of the night? Imagine being alone, hearing your name softly spoken from a place no one should be. This is exactly what happened to Sergio Roberts. What he experienced will make you think twice about looking into the darkness. Tonight, I'll tell you his terrifying story, The Visitor from the Chimney. Are you ready to be scared? Hello. My name is Sergio Roberts, and I've never shared this story with anyone outside my closest circle until now. I hope you'll listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is as real as the walls around you. And if you think this couldn't happen to you, you're wrong. It can. It all began 3 days before Christmas. I had recently moved into a small rental house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much to look at, just a 2-bedroom place with creaky floors and drafty windows. But for someone like me who wanted peace and quiet, it was perfect. The landlord seemed eager to rent it out. He offered me a low price and asked for very little in return. At the time, I didn't question it. I figured he was just happy to get a tenant after the house had been empty for so long. The first night in the house was uneventful. I unpacked a few boxes, set up my bed, and made a simple dinner. The house was cold, so I decided to use the old fireplace in the living room. It was large, with bricks that were chipped and blackened from years of use. Above it, the chimney rose into the darkness, its opening swallowing all the light. As I sat by the fireplace that evening, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, like the house was watching me. I tried to brush it off. It's an old place, I told myself. Old houses have character. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something. At first it was faint, a soft tapping sound, like fingers drumming against wood. Then it became louder, more distinct. It sounded like scratching, coming from the walls. I turned on my bedside lamp and sat up, straining to hear. The noise seemed to be moving, growing closer. My heart thudded harder with each passing second, and then it stopped suddenly, leaving only silence. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I decided to investigate. I checked the walls and floors for any signs of pests, but found nothing. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or bird trapped in the chimney. That would explain the noises. But when I inspected the fireplace, there were no feathers, droppings, or signs of life, just soot. Later that evening, as I prepared to light the fireplace again, I noticed something unusual. There was a mark in the ashes like a footprint. It was small, much too small to belong to me. My stomach tightened as I stared at it. I must have missed it before, I thought nervously, but the more I looked, the less it felt like a coincidence. That night, the noises returned. This time, they were louder and more deliberate. The scratching had a rhythm, almost like something was trying to claw its way out. I sat frozen in my bed, staring at the doorway, half expecting to see someone or something walk through. And then I heard it, a whisper, low and raspy, carried through the house like a cold wind. Sergio. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't possible. No one knew I was here. I hadn't told anyone my name except for the landlord. I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the living room, my heart pounding with every step. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. Let me in. The flashlight beam trembled as I shined it toward the fireplace. The room was deathly quiet now, but the air was heavy, suffocating. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, I backed away and locked myself in my bedroom. The next day, I called the landlord. I didn't tell him everything, only that I was hearing noises and was concerned about the chimney. He was quiet for a moment before saying, I wouldn't use that fireplace if I were you. When I pressed him for details, he quickly changed the subject. I decided I had to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what was in that chimney. Armed with the flashlight, I climbed onto the roof and peered inside. The chimney was dark and narrow, its walls lined with thick layers of soot. As I shined the light deeper, I saw something that made my heart stop. A face. We die. And I stared into those eyes and said, and then I looked around. Pale and hollow-eyed, it stared back at me from the darkness. Its mouth was twisted into a grin that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. I gasped and nearly lost my balance. When I looked again, the face was gone. I was shaken. I climbed down and called two of my friends. I told them what I had seen, but they didn't believe me. Still, they agreed to come over and help me look. When we opened the fireplace, there was nothing there. No footprints, no face, no sign that anyone or anything had been inside. My friends laughed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination. But as we were leaving, I noticed something on the floor by the fireplace. A single footprint, small and faint, pressed into the soot. That was the last time I set foot in that house. I packed my things and moved out the next day, leaving behind the memory of those whispers and that terrible face. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in that house. Was it a ghost, a demon, or something worse? All I know is that sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear it. Let me in. What would you do if you were in Sergio's shoes? Could you face the unknown, or would you run and never look back? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you have your own scary story, send it to me. I might just feature it in my next video. Until next time, stay safe and remember, some doors and chimneys are better left closed. My name is David M. Mercado, and I've carried this story with me for years, locked away in the deepest corners of my mind. I've avoided talking about it, convinced that no one would believe me, but I can't hold it in any longer. I need to tell you what happened on that fateful Christmas Eve. It started like any other holiday night, peaceful, cozy, and full of cheer. My wife and children were asleep upstairs, the house aglow with the soft light of the Christmas tree, and snow fell gently outside, blanketing the town in a serene hush. Everything felt perfect, almost magical. But as midnight approached, the magic turned into something far darker. I thought I was stepping outside to enjoy a moment of solitude, to take in the stillness of the snowy night. Instead, I walked straight into a nightmare that I'll never forget. The air outside was crisp, biting at my skin as I stepped onto the porch. I could see my breath in the cold, little puffs of white that dissolved into the night. The street was empty, the snow untouched except for the faint glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the icy ground. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, feeling a deep sense of calm. And then I heard it. It started softly, almost too faint to notice, a slow, melodic singing that carried on the wind. At first I thought it was just a group of carolers like the ones you'd see in old Christmas movies, but the tune wasn't cheerful or familiar. It was haunting, a strange and mournful melody that didn't belong to any holiday song I'd ever heard. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see where the voices were coming from, but the street was empty. The singing grew louder, filling the air with an eerie harmony that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. It's just carolers, I told myself, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The singing continued, growing closer. It was hypnotic, pulling at me in a way I couldn't explain. I stepped off the porch, my boots crunching in the snow, and peered down the street. That's when I saw them. At first they were just dark shapes in the distance, barely visible against the snowy backdrop. As they moved closer, the light from a nearby street lamp illuminated them, and I froze. They weren't ordinary carolers. They were dressed in tattered white robes that seemed to shimmer faintly under the streetlights. Their faces were pale and lifeless, their eyes glowing with a dim, unnatural light. Each one held a hymn book, but their movements were mechanical, like puppets being controlled by invisible strings. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, forming words to a song I didn't understand. It wasn't in any language I knew, yet the melody seeped into my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a cold, suffocating fog. I stood there, unable to move, as the figures glided closer. The snow didn't crunch beneath their feet. They made no sound except for their haunting song. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. The carolers didn't respond. They stopped at the edge of my driveway, their glowing eyes fixed on me. The singing grew louder, more intense, filling the night with a dreadful energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. It was as if their song had rooted me in place, paralyzing me with fear. One of them stepped forward, their hymn book clutched tightly in their skeletal hands. Their eyes bore into mine, and for a moment, the singing stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like a weight. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of the earth, the figure spoke. "Open your door." My heart nearly stopped. "What do you want?" I stammered, barely able to get the words out. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes unblinking. "Join us," it said, its voice echoing in my mind like a command I couldn't ignore. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't let them in, but the pull to obey was overwhelming. It was like their song had infected my thoughts, twisting them into something that wasn't my own. Suddenly, the rest of the carolers began to move, their pale hands reaching out as they stepped onto my driveway. Their song resumed, louder and more menacing than before. In a panic, I turned and bolted for the door. My hands fumbled with the doorknob, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it. But just as I felt the icy grip of one of the carolers brush against my shoulder, I threw the door open and slammed it shut behind me. The singing stopped. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. The house was silent. The only sound, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I peeked through the window, but the street was empty. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for the carolers to return. But they never did. By morning, the snow outside was pristine, untouched, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was all a bad dream, but the memory of their glowing eyes and haunting song was too vivid, too real. For days after, I felt like I was being watched, like their presence lingered just outside my view. I don't know who or what they were, but every Christmas Eve, I hear that faint melody in the back of my mind. A chilling reminder of the night the silent carolers came for me, and I wonder if, one day, they'll return. My name is George Morgan, and this happened just last year. I don't consider myself a believer in ghosts or anything supernatural, but after what I experienced, I can't find any other explanation. It started with a simple idea. My wife Sarah and I wanted a quiet Christmas away from the city. We were tired of the noise, the chaos, and the endless rush of holiday shopping. Sarah found a listing online for a cabin in the woods, a few hours away from our home. It looked perfect, small, cozy, and surrounded by snow-covered trees. The photos showed a roaring fireplace and a large Christmas tree already set up in the corner. It seemed like the perfect escape. When I called the owner to book it, the man on the phone hesitated. He asked if I was sure about staying there over Christmas. I laughed it off, thinking he was trying to upsell us or something. But his tone grew serious. He warned me that the cabin had a history one he didn't like to share. When I pressed him, he muttered something about strange things happening and people leaving before their stay was over. I brushed it off. I wasn't going to let a few ghost stories ruin our holiday plans. We arrived on Christmas Eve. The drive was long and the sun was already setting by the time we pulled up to the cabin. It looked just like the pictures, maybe even better. The snow glistened under the fading light, and the chimney puffed out a thin stream of smoke. Inside, the place was warm and inviting. The fireplace crackled, and the Christmas tree twinkled with colorful lights. There were stockings hung on the mantle, as if someone had decorated it just for us. Sarah was thrilled, and I felt a sense of relief. But as we unpacked, I noticed something odd. The cabin was silent, too silent. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees, nothing. It felt like the world outside had stopped. That night, as we sat by the fire sipping hot chocolate, Sarah brought up the strange feeling she had. She said it felt like we were being watched. I laughed and told her it was just the isolation getting to her, but deep down, I felt it too. When we went to bed, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing faint noises, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound had a human quality to it, like someone was trying to talk but couldn't quite form the words. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a loud thud. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the living room. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check it out. The Christmas tree was on the floor, ornaments were scattered everywhere, and the lights were unplugged. Sarah joined me, her face pale. "Did you hear it too?" she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't know what to say. There was no sign of anyone else in the cabin, and the doors were locked. The next morning, we tried to shake off the unease and enjoy Christmas Day. We exchanged gifts and cooked a big breakfast. But the strange events didn't stop. According to the security records kept by the U.S. Army, at 9 a.m., while Sarah was in the kitchen, she screamed. I ran in to find her staring at the window. On the frosted glass, someone or something had written a single word: leave. I grabbed a towel and wiped it off, trying to calm her down, but as soon as I turned around, I saw it again, this time on the mirror in the hallway. We decided to leave early, but when I went to start the car, it wouldn't turn on. The engine was dead, even though I had checked it before we left home. What the fuck? As night fell, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer faint. They echoed through the cabin, overlapping like a chorus of voices. Then came the knocking. It started softly, like someone tapping on the windows, but soon it grew more aggressive, as if something wanted to break in. In a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, I searched the cabin for anything that might explain it. In the attic, I found an old journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the writing was clear. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas, who had lived in the cabin with his family decades ago. His entries started out normal, describing their daily lives. But as Christmas approached, the tone changed. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. The final entry chilled me to the bone. It said, "They come every Christmas. They want what they lost. If you're reading this, it's too late." Suddenly, the temperature in the attic dropped. My breath turned to mist, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but no one was there. I ran downstairs to find Sarah huddled by the fire, crying. She said she had seen figures outside, shadowy shapes, moving through the snow. We decided to leave on foot despite the freezing cold in the dark woods. As we stepped outside, the whispers followed us, growing louder with each step. The shadows moved closer, and I could feel their presence surrounding us. Somehow we made it to the main road, where a passing truck picked us up. The driver didn't say a word as we climbed in, but the look on his face told me he knew about the cabin. "This is our house." We never spoke about what happened to anyone, not even each other, but I can't forget the faces I saw in the shadows, or the cold touch of that hand in the attic. So if you're ever tempted to spend Christmas in a remote cabin, think twice. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed, especially during the holidays.